Hello, my name is Phil Clothier. I'm very happy to be co-presenting with David and Joni today, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. The topic I'd like to share with you today is cultures of peace, and we're going to explore measurement, transformation, and the extraordinary influence of inner peace and leaders on organizations, communities, and even whole nations. I'd like to start with a definition from my friend and colleague Richard Barrett. A culture of peace is one in which all people belonging to a group are able to get their needs met. And we'll be looking at how we're able to determine what the needs of people are and how in meeting those it brings possibility for greater peace to exist. I want to start with the tale of two organizations. We asked the employees at Organization A to select the values and behaviors that most reflect how their organization currently operates. And they said, number one value, client satisfaction, then making a difference, then integrity and teamwork. Each of the words gets a dot on the chart at a level. So you can see client satisfaction, for example, is a level 2 relationship value. Humor and fun is a level 5 internal cohesion value. It bonds people together. A spread of dots across the levels is a good thing. It means they're operating with what we call full spectrum consciousness. We asked the employees at Organization B select the values that most reflect how your organization operates, and they said our number one value is blame, and then short-term focus, and then internal competition. The white dots represent the degree of fear within the system, how dysfunctional it is, and this is really a representation of peace not being present. In fact, what we know is the more white dots there are, the more dysfunctional they are, that it disrupts peace to the extent that we see greater levels of both physical and mental sickness within organizations that look like this. So we can now take this from an organizational setting and we can look at how it works within both communities and nations. A few years ago, we were asked to work with an Indigenous community in Northern Australia. And this was a community in crisis. There were high levels of alcoholism, family violence was going on, and much unemployment and real hopelessness within the community. We did a values assessment, and a brilliant consultant called Annalise Jennings was involved in facilitating them finding their own answers. And over the course of the next 3 years, we saw some remarkable results. We saw a 60% increase in employment, an 80% reduction in children attending the safe house, reduction in adult domestic violence. So really fantastic results of the community listening to and understanding its own needs and creating its own new future. We also know that there was really positive impact on all of these aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. One beautiful story at the end of this, that a couple of years later, they actually closed the safe house because it was no longer needed. We were also asked to do a national values assessment for Latvia by the Latvian government, and they took the results and they ran 18 months of dialogue with citizens in town halls, in villages, in the big cities. And based on that, the Latvian government created the Sustainable Development Strategy for Latvia until 2030, based on the values and needs of the people, directly expressed by the people. This is a powerful way for a government to understand and listen to its people. One of the powerful outcomes from this story was that a new level of understanding around racial divide between, in this case, the Latvians living in Latvia and Russians living in Latvia. There was much racial tension, lack of peace, and they facilitated, using these results, dialogues between Latvian and Russian teenagers to talk about the values that connected them rather than the beliefs that divided them. Let me say a little bit more about that. We've also measured the values of the people of the USA. And on the left, you'll see the personal values of those people who say they're Democrat. On the right, you'll see the values of those people who say they are Republican. Now, what you can see is that the list is in a slightly different order, and there is one word different. So for the Democrats, it's compassion. For the Republicans, it's integrity. But 9 out of 10 values are exactly the same. So what are these two groups fighting about? We're also teaming up with other organizations and movements such as the Charter for Compassion. And this is a charter from the city of Pomona, again, based on the values assessment that enabled politicians and citizens to sit and talk about how they would create more compassion and therefore peace within their community. We have done national values assessments in all of these countries around the world, and in some, particularly Sweden here, you can see multiple values assessments year after year after year so that we can see the impact of the ongoing work on the culture. Every one of these has a story behind it, and I wish I had time to tell you all these stories, but I need to move now on to the impact of leadership on culture within communities and nations. So what I want to show you now is a leadership values assessment. On the left-hand side, 14 assessors gave feedback to a leader. They said, we see your number one value is power, and then we see you operating with blame, and then demanding and manipulative and controlling and arrogant, and you can see all these words here. And on the right-hand side, we measured the culture of the organization, and you can see that when fear is the dominant style of the leader, that's exactly what shows up in the culture. I want to make it really clear that this was not a bad person. This is a person that had deep childhood trauma and was doing the best they can, really wanted to do a good job. And with deep coaching over the course of the next 18 months, this person was able to make a powerful turnaround in their style, their inner being, which had a very positive impact on the culture. I just want to show you one more example. On the left-hand side, you see the leadership feedback from 14 assessors on a leader. They said, we see you standing for continuous learning and generosity and commitment and positive attitude and ambition and making a difference. And then on the right-hand side, you see the real culture of that organization. Now, while the words are slightly different, what you see is the energy from that leader permeating the energy of the culture and having such a positive impact. Now let's look at this a little bit more deeply, and I'm going to use the metaphor of a tree, because a tree has that which is above the surface, which is visible, and that which is below the surface, which is invisible. And for this, I'm also going to use, to make it clear, I'm going to use one person, Richard Branson, and the Virgin organization, so you can see the impact of an individual on the collective. So on the left-hand side, we've got the individual. On the right-hand side, we've got the organization or the collective. So we start with the inner self, and this is what we can't see in Richard Branson because it's inside of him. It's his values, its beliefs, and his priorities. But what we can see is his behaviors. We can listen to him talking, we can see his decisions, and we can see his actions. And when there's alignment between these, that's a sense of integrity. When the inner self aligns with the outer self, we see that integrity. Next, we're talking about the values, beliefs, and priorities of the organization. And that's what we call the culture. And at the top, we see the behaviors, decisions, and actions of the Virgin organization, the products they produce, the services they offer, and how they look after each other is all a feature of how their values and beliefs and priorities show up in the outer world. So here's the flow of influence. We start with the inner beliefs, values, and priorities of Richard Branson, which then show up in his behaviors and actions. And that has an impact on the values, beliefs, and priorities of the culture, which also shows up in the way that the organization operates. The more work the person has done on their own inner self, on finding their own inner peace, that shows up in their behaviors and actions, which has a direct impact on the culture and way of being of the organization. So let me explore this with a couple of extreme examples. Imagine we're not talking about Richard Branson and Virgin, but instead we're talking about Gandhi and India. And Gandhi's inner sense of peace and pure beingness showed up to have such a positive impact, not just on India, but on the whole world. And then we take another example, which in this case is Hitler and Nazi Germany. And the lack of peace that Hitler experienced inside had a profound impact, not just on Nazi Germany, but on the whole planet. The Australian Futures Project recognizes that most politicians go into office and they've had very little training on their inner being or how to actually serve society. They're running a program which is a deep discovery on values and purpose, and also the fears that are holding them back, in order that they can confront them and create more internal cohesion and inner peace so they can show up and serve in a whole different way from a space of compassion. I want to share a little more about the measurements we take and how that leads to dialogue. So firstly, we ask about the personal values of the people within the nation or the organization. And this really shows us the values that are important to people in their personal lives. We then look at the current culture, how people perceive and experience their society or their organization, what is working well, but also what's undermining the peace and sustainability of the nation and the quality of life for citizens. And the last set of values show us what the people believe is necessary for them to meet their needs, improve their lives, and help the nation to become more peaceful. We've been collaborating with Nonviolence International for the last 6 months and exploring how to measure culture of peace. And together we've created this set of values which we believe are the core culture of peace values, and we're able to see the degree to which those values are alive in the current culture and the degree to which people believe and desire those values in order to create more peaceful society. We've also been able to map our model against the culture of peace values and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We started with the United Nations model called the 5 Ps: people, prosperity, planet, peace and partnership, which of course align to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have redeveloped this to look at both an organizational and societal standpoint so that we can now map the values for both organizations, community and nations in this way. So I now want to show you the real culture result for an organization where we added this extra dimension of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 5 Ps. And that was such a powerful insight when the leaders saw this. They've been focusing on creating specific partnerships over the last 2 years, and when they saw this result showing the potentially limiting values, they had a big aha moment. They said, if we're experiencing silo mentality, information hoarding, confusion, internal competition and control internally, how on earth are we ever going to create partnerships externally that are all the things that we want them to be? And then they looked at peace and they said, wow, if we have hierarchy, power, empire building, blame and manipulation internally, how are we ever going to be a force for good out there in the world? This is only an early prototype, but we're really excited about what we're discovering, how this state of inner being, how the awareness of our inner being and what we can do about it can have a tremendous impact on how we show up, both as organizations and society, in order to create more peace and fulfillment of the United Nations global goals. In 2012, we launched a new assessment called the Personal Values Assessment, and we wanted to make that free of charge so that everybody had this opportunity to explore what their own personal values were. And we had no idea how this was going to be used, the extent to which it would get out there in the world and make a difference. But I want to share 2 quick stories with you. We heard of one hospice where patients were asked to take the personal values assessment, and also the physician or the staff would also take the values assessment, and they would sit and they would talk to each other about what was most important and what they both needed in order to care for each other in these final days of life. We also heard about a program in the US which is supporting military veterans to come back from war zones, and we know there are high levels of post-traumatic stress disorder and suicide. Many more veterans die from suicide than they do in the field of combat. The personal values assessment is being used to help veterans really reconnect with what matters most, their personal values, and how they connect to themselves, their family, and their community, taking baby steps on reconnecting with life. So I want to invite you to take your own personal values assessment at this website, valuecentre.com/PVA, for you to discover how your values show up in your being and your behaviors and your actions and words in how you are with other people. So I realize that I've really just scratched the surface of the depth of this topic. I'm really excited about how we're connecting these fields of values and culture, peace, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to see how we can together understand these motivations, what's working well and what's holding us back, and how by addressing that and creating new dialogue, we can truly start to make a difference in the world.